Welcome to part 2 of the LOD series. In this series, we look at and discuss the top 15 LOD examples white paper written by Bethany Lyons. In the first part, we looked at 5 use cases: customer order frequency, cohort analysis, daily profit KPI, percent of total, and new customer acquisition. If you missed the first part or want to review it, I provided a link in the card above and description down below. In this second video, we will cover use cases 6 to 10, comparative analysis, average of top values, actual versus target, value on the first and last day of a period, and return purchase by cohort. I have added chapters in the video if you want to check out specific use cases only. I have also posted the completed workbook in my Tableau public profile. The link is provided in the description below. As with part 1, I will use variations with the examples in order to explain the topic. So what you will see here is not exactly the same examples in the white paper. If you're ready, let's go, and I'll see you in a bit. As a reminder, LOD expressions or level of detail expressions allow you to control the granularity or the level of detail of your expression. We usually resort to LODs when our viz or our charts have different levels of granularity than the calculations that we need. If you need an LOD expressions refresher, please check out another comprehensive tutorial I have on this topic. It starts from the basics and goes through the different types of LODs and the implications of the order of operations with LODs. I've also provided a link in the card above and description down below. Let's look at use case number 6, comparative analysis. This is a strategy we can employ when we want to compare a few data points and when we want to quantify the difference between data points. In this example, we will compare subcategory sales to each other. We will show how much more or how much less one subcategory sales is compared to another. We will also summarize how many subcategories overall have more sales than the one that we are looking at. Let's start by displaying each subcategory sales. So let's drag subcategory over. Let's also drag sales onto columns. And let's sort this. Now we want to be able to select a subcategory to compare against. So let's create a parameter that simply copies all the values of our subcategories. So right-click on subcategory right now. We can create a parameter from here. So select parameter. What this does is it simply copies over all the current values, and it will show it as a drop-down in a list. Let's click on OK, and let's show our parameter. So let's start by figuring out the sales for the selected parameter. In this case, if the current selected one is accessories, accessories is right here, we want to know this particular sales amount. After that, what we want to do is we want to know how much more some of the other subcategories are making and how much less some of the other subcategories are making. Let's first create a calculated field that gets our selected subcategory sales. So on the drop-down, create calculated field. Let's call this selected subcategory sales. And in here, we need to check if the subcategory is equivalent to the selected subcategory. If it is, then we want to show the sales and then end. Click OK. Now let's display this. So drag it over to columns. And what we can see in here is it has selected only that bar. For any subcategory that doesn't match our parameter, it is empty, and that is to be expected. Now this poses some issues because what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to compare each of these bars or each of these numbers against the subcategory sales. With LOD expressions though, we can do that. We can exclude the current subcategory value in our expression. Thus, the only thing that will be left is the selected subcategory sales. Let's create a calculated field. So on the drop-down, create calculated field. Let's call this selected subcategory sales. And I'm just going to add exclude here because we are going to exclude our subcategory. Let's put our curly brace. Let's exclude subcategory. So drag that over, a colon, and all we want left is the selected subcategory sales. So drag that over and then close the curly brace. Click OK. And let's display this. Just for reference, I'm going to add all the labels so we can see the numbers. So I'm going to select Show Marked Labels. Let's explain this a little bit. The current selection is accessories. This matches that subcategory. So when there's a match, we are displaying the sales. However, some of these values are empty. And the reason for that is phones is not the same as accessories. If we eliminated subcategory, then we will still be left with this 167,000. And that's what we want to do. We want to have another field that we can use for a mathematical operation. We simply want the difference between the sales and the selected sales. The exclude allows us to do that. It's as if we don't have the subcategory in our view at all. Our expression doesn't even see the existence of subcategory. Once we have this in place, it is now actually easy to figure out what the differences are. So let's create another calculated field. Let's call this difference. And now this is a simple math operation. We want to take the sales and we want to subtract our calculation that has the exclude LOD. So drag that over and click OK. And then let's display the difference. Let's duplicate this worksheet and let's clean up the next worksheet. So right click, duplicate the worksheet. In this second worksheet, let's remove the middle two fields. So let's drag this out and drag that out. Let's also now remove our marked labels. For the second chart, I also want to color this based on the difference. So let's copy that over onto here. So right now, what we can see is accessories. There is zero difference because we are comparing a subcategory to itself, but we can see the difference against all the ones that are actually making more, and we can see the difference against all the ones that are making less. Let's try it for a different subcategory. So for example, we take tables. We can see that for tables, there are 3 subcategories that are making more, and the rest of them are making less. So this is one way we can do comparative analysis. Let's cap this example off by adding some kind of summary in our title. So let's create one more calculated field, and in here, we just want to count how many subcategories are actually making more so that we don't have to manually scan and count them. Let's call this number of subcategories with more sales. So the main logic in here is if this difference is greater than 0, then we are going to output just 1, and we're going to end this. Now what will happen here is it will output 1 for each of the bars that are positive. Now what we also want to do is we want to sum all of those ones. And because difference is already an aggregation, we're going to have to pass that to another table calculation. We are going to use the window sum table calculation function. So let's enclose the whole thing in a window sum, window underscore sum. And then let's close the parentheses. Click OK. Let's add this to our all marks card, put that in detail, and then now we can start using it in our title. So in insert, let's use that new field. Let's click on OK and let's test this out. Click OK. There are 3 subcategories with more sales than tables. Let's try to test out accessories again. So on the drop down, accessories. And in here, we can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 positive bars. There are 6 subcategories that have more sales than accessories. In this next example, we will look at some top values and get the average of these top values so we can display it in our viz. Does it sound simple? Well, the challenge in this use case is that the chart that we are using does not have the detail that we need with our calculation. We are going to be using a map that shows only state values, but what we want to calculate requires customer ID, which we do not want to show in our charts. Let's take a look at this. Let's start by creating 2 charts first. The first one is a map. Let's double click on state. Let's drag over sales to color. Let's also create a second chart that simply shows each customer in a state and their maximum sales or their top sales. So on a second worksheet, let's take state. Let's take customer ID. And let's right-click drag sales so that we can select max sales. So in here in the drop field window, we want to select max sales. So it's going to be the top sales, the highest sale for a customer. Let's click OK. And let's sort the bars. Now, if we want to know the average of these max sales, an easy way to do it in Tableau is to go to the Analytics tab, drag over the average line, and let's set this per pane so that we have a different average per state. And in here, let's simply edit the average line so that it shows the values. So right-click, edit. In the label, we're going to show the value. And let's also format this so that it shows at the very top. So right-click, format. In the alignment, we're going to align it to the top. So what is our challenge here? Our challenge is we want to show $485 for Alabama in our map, but we also don't want to bring over customer ID in our map. We simply want it to be part of our calculation. With LOD expressions, we can do that. We can simply include customer ID in our expression, and we should be able to get this $485 as a tooltip for our map. Let's go back to our data pane. So remember, in our map, we have state, and it also brought over country and region. In our details, where we were able to get the value that we need, we have customer ID that doesn't exist in our map. So in our calculated field, let's create one right now. So create calculated field. Let's call this average of top customer sales. In here, we simply need to include, so curly brace, include, and we want to include customer ID, colon, and in this case, our aggregation is the max of sales. So we can simply drag that over into our calculated field editor. Remember that each of these bars is the max, but what we also want to do is we want to average all of these numbers out. So we're simply going to enclose this expression in another aggregation, which is an average. So AVG. So let's click OK. Let's add this new calculated field to our map, and we can check the value for Alabama. Let's search for Alabama. And in here, we are indeed seeing $485, which is the average of all the maximums. Let's do one more check. Let's create a dashboard and take a look at other places as well. Let's add the map. Let's add our map details. And let's add a filter action. So in here, use as filter. So if we select California, we should be able to confirm that the values are the same. Let's try one more. Let's say Texas, 337, 337. For the 8th use case, I am using an adjusted version of the coffee chain dataset that was originally used in the white paper. This dataset is all about coffee and tea sales. Each record in this data source has profit and target profit. In this example, we will show how to calculate the proportion of products that meet their targets, as well as how to break this down to identify exactly which of the products met their targets and which products didn't. Let's set up some basic charts first so that we can see exactly what we want to accomplish for this use case. Let me bring over state. And for now, let's display profit and target profit. Let's also create a calculated field that tells us the difference between profit and target profit. Let's call this difference. And this is profit minus target profit. And let's display this as well. Let's sort this chart by the difference. And let's also count the number of products. So we can right-click drag product onto our columns and select count distinct. So right now, what we are seeing is the profit for each state, the target profit. From this chart, we can also tell which states actually exceeded their target and which states did not. And for now, we are also displaying the number of products. Let's quickly display all the labels. Here we are seeing that there are 9 products for Iowa, but what we also want to see is the proportion of these 9 products. How many of these 9 products met their target profit and how many did not? And again, the challenge in here is we don't want to show the individual products in the final viz. Now, just to visualize what we are trying to accomplish, if we bring over product, let's sort the difference again. We can see that for Iowa, there are 4 products of the original 9 products met their target profit, and the rest did not meet their target profit. So we want to be able to report this in our viz. So let's clean this up a bit and let's create some additional calculated fields. Let's take away product, and let's also take away sum of profit and the target profit. Let's now create a calculated field that allows us to see the difference between profit and target profit, but this time per product. And we're going to use an include LOD. So on the drop down, create calculated field. Let's call this difference of profit versus target. And this is per product. In here, let's include product. It's going to be the sum of the difference. Let's click OK. Now let's try to answer the question, how many of these products per state actually met their target profit? And in here, let's use another calculated field. Let's call this the number of products that met target. How do we know the products met their target? Well, if the difference is greater than 0. So if this particular difference is greater than 0, let's output 1. And then let's end this. So let's say we have 3 products. Product 1, product 2, product 3. If product 1 met its target, it's going to get 1. If product 2 did not meet its target, it's just going to be null. And then product 3, if it met its target, it's also going to be 1. Now what we want to do in here is we want to sum this up. We want to add 1 and 1 because there are 2 products that met the target. So in this case, we're simply going to enclose the whole thing in a sum. Sum. And let's click OK. Let's display this. Number of products that met target. And these are the numbers that we want. We can see that 4 products out of the 9 products met their target. And if we wanted to calculate the percentage, we can easily do that now because we have all of the fields that we need in that equation. So one more calculated field. Let's create a calculated field that's called % of products that met target. And in here, it is simply this number of products that met target divided by the total number of products for that state. Let's click OK. Let's change the formatting, right click, default properties, number format, simply going to be a percentage. We can leave it as 0 decimal places. And we can also display this if we want. So we can see that 4 divided by 9 is 44%. 44% of those products met their target. Let's create a details worksheet. Let's put this in a dashboard so that it's easy for us to verify if our numbers are correct. So for this one, let's put our product in. Let us put the profit. Let's remove the labels. Let's add the target as a reference line. So target profit onto details. Let's go to analytics, reference line. Let's add this per cell. Let's also color code this. So if the product met the target, it's going to have a different color than the one that did not meet its target. So create one more calculated field that we are going to use both for label and color. So on the drop down, create calculated field. Let's call this met target. And this is simply an if statement. If the profit is greater than or equal to the target profit, then we're just going to call this met target. Else did not meet target. Let's click OK. Let's use this as both a label as well as color. And let's just make some adjustments to color. And this is what we have. Let us now put these 2 charts in a dashboard. Drag these 2 over. Let's put our details at the bottom. Let's close the legends. Let's add our filter action. So let's try it out. Looks like for New York, there are 6 products out of 8 that met the target. Therefore, there are 2 products that did not meet the target. So if we click on New York right now, we get 6 products that met the target, and 2 of those products did not meet the target. Let's try one more. Louisiana, there are 3 products that met the target. We have 1, 2, 3. There are total 7 products, which means there are 4 products that did not meet the target. For the 9th use case, we will create a monthly sales graph. However, in addition to monthly sales, we will also extract and display sales on just the first day of the month, sales on just the last day of the month, and also display the difference between the first and the last day sales. Let's start by creating our monthly sales chart. Right-click, drag order date onto columns. Select our continuous date value for month, 4th from the bottom. Let's drag over sales onto rows. Now let's duplicate this view as a crosstab. Right-click, duplicate as crosstab. Now what we're seeing in here is the full month and the sales for the full month. What we want to be able to do is to extract just the first day of the month, the last day of the month, and the sales for each of those days. There is a way to do this using level of detail expressions. We can use the include LOD. So let's create a calculated field. Let's call this first of month. Let's add include. Now, since the detail that we really want is still within this particular date, we can simply use a curly brace and then include with no dimensions with it. So curly brace, include, just a colon. And for the first of the month, it's simply the first day that we have in our data source for this particular month. So min of order date. Let's click OK and display this. Let's right-click drag, display the month. So what we are seeing in here is the breakdown of the first record, the first date in that particular month. January 2018 does not start with January 1st, and all this means is we don't have a record for January 1st or January 2nd. We can validate that by looking at the details. So click on this, view data, let's go to full data, and if we sort by order date, indeed, the first record has a January 3 date. Let's close this. We can use a very similar logic for the last date of the month, and what we really mean in here is the last date based on our records. So let's duplicate this, and let's edit. Let's call this last of month. And instead of minimum, it's simply just going to be a maximum. Let's click OK. Let's display this as well. So right-click drag, and let's display this. So we're seeing in here the first day of the month based on our records, the last day of the month based on our records. Using these dates, we can extract the sales for the first day of the month and the last day of the month. It's simply an if statement. So let's create that calculated field. So drop down, create calculated field. Let's call this first of month sales. So this is simply if order date is equal to the first of the month, then we simply want sales, then sales. Let's click OK. We're going to do something similar for the last day of the month sales. Another calculated field, last of month sales. I'm just going to copy over the same expression, and we are simply going to change first of month to last of month. Click OK. So let's display these first in our charts. Go back to our chart. Let's take our first of month sales. We could create a shared axis chart by dragging last of month sales onto the existing first of month sales axis. So drag this over. We can make adjustments to our color later on if we need to. Now, since we already have our sales for the first of month and last of month, it's going to be easy for us to calculate the differential between these. So one more calculated field. Let's call this first and last day difference. First and last day difference. And this is simply the difference between our first of month sales minus our last of month sales. Let's click OK. And now we can display this. So drag that over. We can make adjustments to our mark. We can make this a bar chart. So selecting this pill and activating that marks card, we can change this from automatic to a bar. And we can also use this measure to determine the color. So we can have a diverging palette where you have different colors for positive and negative values. So control drag onto color. And this caps our 9th use case. For use case 10, we are going to revisit cohort analysis, which we introduced in part 1 of this series. This time around, let's try to identify how long it took for our customers to come back and purchase again from us. Was it less than 6 months? Did they wait more than a year? More than 2 years? And how many of them did not come back? Let's first look at the details of our customer purchases. Let's drag over customer ID. Let's also display all the dates of their purchases. So right-click drag order date right beside customer ID, and we're simply going to display the discrete date. Click OK. Let's also calculate the cohort they belong to. This should be the first year that they bought from us. We have discussed this in more detail in part 1 of the series, so if you need a refresher, please check that out. So on the drop-down, create calculated field. Let's call this cohort year. And this is going to be a fixed LOD. We're going to fix this to the customer ID. And this should be the minimum year of their purchase date or minimum year of their order date. So min of year of order date. Let's click OK. Let's move this to dimensions because we want this to be simply a descriptor. So drag that over and let's display this. Let's create one more fixed LOD that captures the first date of purchase. The expression is going to be very similar to our cohort expression. So in this case, create calculated field. Let's call this first purchase date. This is going to be fixed to a customer ID. So fixed, drag over customer ID, colon, and this is going to be the minimum of the order date. Min order date. Click OK. Let's display this as well. So right click, drag first purchase date. Let's display the discrete date. Click OK. So in here we can see that we've captured the first purchase year as well as the first purchase date. Now what we need to explore is when was the next time they purchased from us. So for this particular customer, the next time was September 15. We want to be able to capture that into a different column so that we can calculate how long it took for this customer to come back. We can use a fixed level of detail expression to calculate this. What we need to do is to scan all these dates per customer and get the next date after the first purchase date. Let's create a calculated field. Let's call this second purchase date. So this is going to be a fixed LOD expression, but let's work through the logic first. How do we know the second purchase date? Well, we will know the second purchase date if the date is greater than our first purchase date. So at the core of it is really an if statement. If the order date is greater than our first purchase date. And if this is true, we simply want to output the order date because we know it is greater than or later than our first purchase date. Let's take a look at this. For this particular customer, that's the first purchase date. Therefore, this expression will give us null. This second purchase date is greater than the first purchase date. Therefore, we are going to display this value. But this seems problematic because this is also going to output October 4, March 3, and June 29. When we get a group of these records, all we need to do is to simply pass that to another aggregation, which is required for our level of detail expression anyway. So we're simply going to pass that to another aggregation function called min. So let's complete our expression. We're going to fix this to a customer ID again. So it's still going to be fixed to a customer ID. So drag that over, colon, and what we want is simply the minimum of this group of dates. So we can pass this to a min function. Let's pass the whole thing over. Let's make this a little bit bigger so we can see everything. And then let's close our parentheses. Actually, I'm just going to move that over so it's a little bit more readable. And let's close our curly brace. Let's click OK and let's see if this is right. So right click, drag second purchase date. Let's display that. So right now we have our cohort year. First purchase date is the first one that we're seeing in our records. The second purchase date is 9/15, which is correct. So all that's left for us to do is to calculate how long it took for this customer to come back. To calculate the difference between two dates, we can use a function called dateDiff, and we can pass in many different units. We can calculate the number of years, the number of quarters, number of months, number of days. For this example, let's just use number of months. So another calculated field, let's create a calculated field here. Let's call this number of months between purchase. And this is simply going to be a dateDiff. We are looking for the unit month. Our start date is the first purchase date. Our end date is the second purchase date. Let's close this parentheses and let's click on apply. Let's click OK. I'm going to move this to dimensions again because we simply want this to be a tag or a descriptor. So let's take a look at this. Let's display. So it looks like this customer took 6 months to purchase. Another customer, same thing, 6 months to purchase. But we have some customers that did not come back right away. This particular customer took 26 months to come back. One more thing I want to do is to group the number of months into specific periods. Perhaps we want to capture less than 6 months, 6 to 12 months, 12 to 24 months, and then 24 plus months. There are many different ways of doing this, but I'm going to use the group functionality in Tableau for this example. So let's right click on number of months between purchase, create, group, and in here I'm going to capture 0 to 5. Let's group that. Let's call this less than 6 months. Let us capture 6 to 12. Let's group that and call that 6 to 12 months. Let's capture 13 to 24. Let's group that. Let's call that 13 to 24 months. Anything that's over, we're simply just going to say it's 24 plus months. 24 plus months. And for customers who did not come back, it is going to be null because there is not a second purchase date. We're simply going to call this lapsed. Let's click OK. So let's create our viz. In a blank worksheet, let's drag over our cohort. Let's display our duration group. Rearrange this a little bit. Let's rearrange the duration as well. So less than 6 months has to be the first one. And then let's count the number of customers. Right-click, drag customer ID onto our view, and let's select Count Distinct. Let us also add our totals. So under Analytics, double-click on Totals. So we can see in here from our 2018 cohort, there's one customer who did not come back. Majority of them did come back in the less than 6 months range. For our 2021 cohort, maybe it's a little bit too early, but 6 of them haven't come back yet. If we wanted to add the percentage, we can simply add our table calculation. So in this case, let's take our measure on the drop-down, quick table calculation. Perhaps we want percent of total. Let's change the precision on the drop-down, format, and in here, just 0 decimal places for percentage. Let's close the formatting pane. And let's add the original numbers back. I'm going to right-click, drag customer ID again onto our view, select Count Distinct again, and I'm just going to rearrange our fields. So I'm going to move measure names before our cohort year. If we want to convert this to a highlight table, we can simply take our measure values, copy that to color, and change our mark to square. Control drag onto color, change the mark to a square. And there you go. This answers the question, which customers came back, how long it took for them to come back, and how many customers did not come back at all. We finished 5 more practical examples of LODs. We covered comparative analysis, average of top values, we showed actual versus target. We also extracted values on the first day of the month, last day of the month, and get the differential. And the last use case was looking at return purchase by cohort. For the last video, or part 3 of this series, we will cover use cases 11 to 15. We are going to look at percent difference from average across a range or different ranges. We are going to look at relative period filtering. We're going to look at frequency bins, and we've seen flavors of this already. We're going to look at proportional brushing, but also introducing how we can do this using set actions. And the last one is purchase frequency proportion, which adds up our level of detail expression and a little bit more advanced table calculations. I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for your time, and I will see you again next time.